welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure for this conversation as part of this series that I'm doing, conversations with the wise insights and practices for difficult times, to have on my dear friend, teacher, beloved Buddhist voice, one of the most respected voices in Buddhism on the planet, Jack Kornfield, who I'm sure most of you know, founding teacher of Insight Meditation Society, Sparrow Rock Meditation Center, where we teach together, best-selling author of so many books I don't have time to say, but among them Path with Heart and The Wise Heart, etc. I forget what your most recent one is. What's it called?
It's called No Time Like the Present.
No Time Like the Present. Great.
Just now, James. It's be here now in a new form.
So it's really great to have you here. Thanks for being with us.
Sure. Happy to. Very happy.
So what I've been doing with these conversations is just getting the wisest perspective and approach that these wonderful friends are sharing about how they're holding these times and what practices they use and how they can share whatever is working for them with others that might benefit from their internal holding of this crazy moment in our time. So first, your wisest perspective. We are going through so much chaos and turmoil most every day on so many different fronts. How do you hold it in a way that doesn't overwhelm or discourage or despair? Any way that you can wrap your mind around it so that you're staying sane and positive and motivated?
Well, your question comes from a certain state of consciousness that has the view that it's more chaotic and worse now than some other time, and we're up Schitt's Creek, to use the vernacular, and blah, 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 you know. And I can remember talking to my mom when we were going through really tough times, like in the 60s, and, you know, all the assassinations of Dr. King and so forth, and the Vietnam War. And she said, when I was born, my dad had just come back from the First World War in France. And then we had the Great Depression, and then we had the Second World War. Listen, kiddo, we've been through much harder times than this. So we're talking about incarnation into duality, birth and death, and joy and sorrow, and the stock market goes up and down, and the seasons turn, and civilizations rise and fall, and sometimes, you know, they're good ones, and sometimes it's Nero while Rome burns. But this is actually what human incarnation is about, and it's not like a mistake. And I know there's a tremendous amount of anxiety with the people that I teach all over, you know, cultural, social anxiety, because of the vulnerable in the world and in the country, whether it's immigrants or people of color or disabled people or transgender people or, you know, just poor people compared to those who are tremendously rich, and the income gap, or, you know, for all kinds of things that are under threat now. And it's very real, and it's extremely painful. And I take a breath or two. With anxiety, I don't have a lot of it around this, but at times it comes. I visualize taking the anxiety, feeling it in my body, saying, okay, this is what anxiety feels like, or worry feels like, holding it, seeing its story, thank you. And then sometimes I put it in the lap of Kuan Yin or the Bodhisattvas and say, you know, it's not my job to take care of the whole world. It's my job to do what I can do. And, you know, you have the perspective of a million years. And the main thing that we have to offer people is to not let the outside terror and the outside fear and confusion, because the politics is basically fear mongering. And it's not new for centuries. You know, let's scare people, and then they'll vote for us, or they'll support our dictatorship, or whatever it happens to be. Is to not let the outer fear and anxiety take over the heart. So I have a very different worldview in some ways than the one that's centered on anxiety. And I don't want it to colonize my heart. So then what becomes important for me and for people that I work with and so forth is to hear ways to quiet your mind, vast perspective of great time, practice of equanimity, and practice of metta for yourself, for all the vulnerable, and also for all the bad guys. And I'm using that phrase probably literally because it's not very many bad women, I'm sorry to say. And I do metta for, you know, Bashar al-Assad and so forth. And the metta is, may you be free from hate. May you be free from fear and ignorance. You know, may you too awaken. Man, I wish that for everybody. But you need to quiet the mind and tend the heart. And then understand that this isn't a new game. This is duality itself. And the Buddha himself tried to intervene in some of the wars that were killing people in the place where he lived, sometimes successfully. And sometimes he couldn't talk these kings and armies out of killing and marauding and so forth. Ajahn Chah, my teacher, said our work is to stop the war. And you start stopping the war in yourself by seeing that inner conflict and battle, and then finding, I belong on this earth, I can take a breath, there's a vastness that holds it all. And mindfulness practice, in one deep way, or loving awareness, it allows us to tolerate duality. It allows us to tolerate birth and death, and joy and sorrow, and gain and loss, and fame and disrepute. It allows us to tolerate ambiguity and anxiety and certainty, because it's all uncertain. And one of the things that I think is so important for people is to know that their internal practice, or their own quieting their minds and becoming a zone of peace so that they don't add to the suffering in the world. I think about James Baldwin, who said, I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hate and fear so stubbornly is that they sense that once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with their own pain. And so, you know, we project our pain and our fear, if we can't deal with it, on others. And you know, on the black people, or on the yellow people, or on the brown people, or on the Mexicans, or the immigrants, or the gays. And it used to be the communists. They were, you know, they're coming back around. They're going to be, you know, they're getting popular again. But there's the enemy du jour, you know, and if we can't tolerate the fact that things change, that we are insecure, that sometimes there's more benevolent people in power, sometimes there's much more, you know, dangerous ones who we need to resist in ways. But until we can tolerate the fact that things are ever changing and it's not so much in our control, we'll be reactive. And when our dear friend Wes Nisker, colleague and teacher, interviewed Gary Snyder, and said, Gary, you're one of the great environmentalists of the world. 50 years ago, Pulitzer Prize, Earth Household, great poet. Now you see the oceans rising, this species going extinct, the global warming. What is your advice for us? And Gary said, don't feel guilty, because your guilt or your anger, all those forces are the very things that are the cause of suffering in the world now. And so if we say that it's not out of guilt or fear or anxiety or anger, we have to say because we love it, you know, and love is really the only force that's big enough to meet the force of greed and the force of hatred, those forces. And that starts in ourselves. And then when we're able to do that, we can go and act and stand up for justice and do the things that are important. But we do it in a really different way, and we hold it in a different way.
Mm-hmm. But that all makes great sense and is really.
And I'm preaching to the choir here. I know you
No,
say the
hey,
same.
I want the choir to hear what you have to say.
Well, yeah,
Oops, sorry,
anyway, okay.
Minister. And just following up on that, so that's a wise perspective to hold when we're not activated. And like you said, these days there's immigrants or refugees who are going to be harmed by policies, and others that are marginalized, that are the ones that bear the brunt of this unskillful mindset of leadership. And people get really torn and activated, not necessarily guilt, but frustration and despair, and feeling compassion that moves into grief and overwhelm, because the integrity of those in power is non-existent. And I just want to ask, for those people who maybe know the perspective that you're talking about, but get activated into their reactions, how would you suggest that they go from their anger, frustration, outrage to that place of love? Any particular practices? And if you want to share any.
Turn off the damn news first of all. You need about 10 minutes a day. The plot is already clear, and whether it's a Greek tragedy and you see things going in a tragic way, you don't need to watch the damn 24-hour news cycle. That is deliberately being designed to algorithms to hook you and keep you afraid. Turn off the news. Honest to God, 10 minutes a day, you get the plot. This person is indicted, that policy. Then you can go out and work and take all the rest of the time that you bring back to yourself and walk in nature and meditate and spend time with children and make art, and feel connected to the earth, because the earth is a whole lot bigger than that. And understand, try to remember and inspire yourself that there are other ways to tend this world than out of agitation, fear, and anxiety, and all of those kind of things. When I came back from being in Dharamsala with the Dalai Lama recently for that Mind Life meetings, and I was teaching in DC at this conference of 4,000 therapists. The next day was the march on Pennsylvania Avenue, march, for our lives. And I went down, and it's probably 750,000 people. It was so civil. And the feeling was one of camaraderie, graciousness, concern and care, but also very loving. Lots of kids, lots of young people. The police and the cops, the security people were all smiling. First of all, they don't want everybody to have a million guns. It's, the cops don't want that. But more than that, there was so much civility and so much real care in it. And yes, the speeches were powerful and fiery at times, but they were held in a container of community and love. And that really changes everything. For people who are anxious, one good read for them would be Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature, which he's an anthropologist, historian, professor at Harvard. And the gist of his writing in that book is that over the last 3 centuries, and he's done a tremendous amount of historical research, the amount of people dying in wars is gradually diminishing. The amount of slavery has diminished dramatically, although there's still 10 million slaves in the world. The lot of women has gradually gotten better and better, and it continues to be, even with its ups and downs, and there's a lot of work yet to be done. child labor, less and less and less, And so news tends to promote the bad shit. It does. And when I was doing peace work in Palestine and Israel, for example, and traveling around, and I met with the former combatants for peace and the bereaved mothers and went to the community, the Sulka and Sulkita, that were bringing Palestinian Israeli teenagers together for years and stuff. There are 200 amazing groups that are doing cross-border work and love. Never gets in the news. But somebody throws a canister of tear gas or rocks or gets shot, and it's all over the news. The news is a very unreliable description of the world. It just is. Again, it's meant mostly to take you over and whiz up your nervous system. So those kind of things. And then to have a bigger perspective. And that's a kind of inner reflection that who we are is spiritual beings born into a human incarnation. And our true nature is consciousness itself. But when you take incarnation, you get duality. You get war and peace, as the old Russians would say in their, and you get joy and sorrow, and you get gain and loss and birth and death. But there's something timeless that's also true, and we know it in our hearts and our beings. There's a poem, let me see if I can find it, from Juan Ramon Jimenez, who writes, "I am not I, yo no soy yo. Okay. I'm not I, I'm this one walking beside me whom I do not see, whom at times I manage to visit, and at other times I forget. The one who remains silent when I talk, the one who forgives sweet when I hate and get upset, the one who takes a walk when I'm indoors, the one who will remain standing when I die." And this is really talking about the fact that who we are is consciousness itself. And with that understanding, then all of a sudden we become the vastness of awareness. We're life looking at itself and messing with itself. And evolution has both aggressive parts, but even as Darwin wrote a lot about, we think of it as the survival of the species, and the Republicans and the Democrats and the Putins and the Macrons and everybody, having their, but much of what Darwin wrote about toward the second part of his work was collaboration and compassion, and how species actually succeed through collaboration. And both are true. They're survival of the fittest, but it's not the end of the story. It's not the whole story. Mm-hmm. And then I reflect, as people might very well, I reflect on working together with my dear friend and inspiration and teacher, Mahago Sananda, the Gandhi of Cambodia. And, we were together in the forest monasteries back in the day. And then after the Cambodian genocide, where 2 million people in a country of, 8 million people were killed, all 19 members of his family, his temples burned. And I went with him to the refugee camps, where he built a little temple in the middle of a camp of 50 or 100,000 people, getting permission from the UNHCR. And because there was a Khmer Rouge underground in this camp, the word went about that if anybody went to he put a kind of a roof and an altar and a platform in the middle of the central area. If anyone went to that temple, they'd be shot when they got out. So is anybody going to come? And we went around ringing this gong through the camp of 50 or 100,000 refugees, and 25,000 people immediately poured into the square. And there he sat, a modest monk in his robes. And I thought, okay, what can he say? You look out and there's people who are in shock, a grandmother and only 2 of her 6 grandchildren still alive, an uncle and a couple of nieces, and their village is burned, and all the worst. And he put his hands together and he began to chant in Cambodian and in Pali, Sanskrit, that beginning verse of the Dhammapada: hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal law. And he chanted it over and over. And pretty soon people began to chant with him. They hadn't heard their Buddhist chants. They hadn't been able to hear them for some years because of the death and oppression. And they began to chant with him and weep. And what he was doing was speaking a truth that was even bigger than their suffering. So no matter what, hatred never ends by hatred, but by love alone is healed. And there's a kind of reflection that in these times where people get anxious, that we need to go back to what are the universal truths that we would stake our lives on, that really matter. You know, so when Dr. King said after his church was bombed, you know, we will meet your physical force with soul force. You know, we will not hate you, but we will do all we can to protect those in danger, or something like that. That the inspiration comes from the great heart of understanding and courage and compassion. And even one person, a Ghosananda, who 15 years led these peace walks through the killing fields and the you know, minefields and so forth, walking people back to their village, chanting loving kindness to reclaim their land with every step. This is possible for us as human beings. We can live in a different way. And as Thomas Jefferson said, one person with courage is a majority. Mm-hmm. It does, you know, one Martin Luther King or one Aung San Suu Kyi or one, you know, Mahagosananda or whoever you happen to admire, or Dolores Huerta or whoever it is, when we find what's true that's bigger than the current situation in ourselves, then we move in a different way. We're a carrier of some beauty and courage and wisdom that's not caught by the stuff. And that's in everybody who's listening. Mm. And all you have to do is go walk and talk to a very large tree that's been there for centuries, or, you know, go look, stand by the ocean, or lie out in the summer and look at the stars. And so what seeds do I carry? What wisdom can I actually plant in this dualistic world? Mm.
Well, let me ask you, just following up on that, hugging one large tree, the one piece that is different now than in previous times is the very real threat to our planet as we see it. And so there is a sense of urgency, at least in that area, that humanity has not had to face before. And people like me and many people who are quite holding our breaths or doing what we can, seeing how this is going to turn out just in the short run about human civilization affecting climate and all like that. That ups the ante when it comes to anxiety and fear and
it ups your ante, it ups your anxiety. I can see it.
Yeah. Well, it's for me, it's both. I've been involved with this for a while, and at times there's a sense of all we can do is what we can do, and if we can connect with that place of loving the earth instead of acting out of fear, then that is the most magnetizing. So I'm right there with you. And there's a kind of processing of the sadness and grief and depression that is part of that digesting and transforming our fear into compassion. But what I'm interested maybe to hear from you is when that anxiety does get activated by people, understandably, and they know better, they know, okay, this is the bigger picture. World systems come and go, and all we can do is what we can do. But their heart and their body gets activated. Any particular?
Well, okay, you're favoring the environmental destruction, which is a very genuine dilemma for us as human beings, although we don't know how this is going to play out. We may decide, because guys are guys, that we're going to do some weird environmental tweaking, and put rust, iron filings in the ocean and change its pH and make a cloud cover and, try to control it. And of course, all of that, we have no idea what it actually would do because it's such a complex system. But guys, they like to mess with stuff. And we don't know how this is going to play out, but you're privileging that. But if you lived near Syria, it would be the millions of refugees, or North Africa. That's what you would be privileging, and if you lived where LGBT and transgender people were being targeted and hauled off and killed, that would be what you would privilege and say, we don't even have time to look at the environment. There are people being killed around us right now, or there is, so everybody gets on their particular horse. and I think we need to each pick something that matters. So I might suggest dismounting, actually, and putting your feet on the ground and saying, all right, there's a lot of horses. Maybe this is the one I should enter in the race.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm not, and yes, here's Wendell Berry. So my friends, every day do something that won't compute, love the world, work out of love for nothing, love someone who doesn't deserve it, invest in the millennium, plant sequoias, put your faith in the 2 inches of humus that will build under the trees every 1,000 years, go with your love to the fields and lie down in the shade and rest your head. So it's what you're saying, you plant the seeds, but this is a much bigger game. And even the environment, we have to do what we can do and work and so forth. But the thing is that we don't know. We don't know, and it's the same in politically. It may be that we're headed for much worse fascist times, and we have to really keep our eyes open and stand up and so forth. Or it may be that it's also a pendulum swing, that things are headed in a bad direction, and it's a kick in the butt that our consciousness needs to say. We don't know that particularly. And I have a very deep kind of trust in the long term, and in the long term regulation, whether it's political, and here's Gandhi. Let me see if I can find this passage from him. Come on, where are you, Mahatma? Where he says, we love Gandhi. Where he says something like, I can't find it now. He says, every time I despair, I remember that throughout history, there have been bullies and tyrants and dictators who seem like they are invincible. And yet when we look, we see that they inevitably and always fall. Think of it, always. So there's also some way in which it's not the end of the story. Wherever we are, we're in a plot. We don't know where it's going to go, and things go in their cycles. And Dina Metzger, great activist, anti-nuclear activist, environmental activist, poet, activist for humane healthcare and so forth. She says, "Give me everything mangled and bruised, and I will make a light of it to make you weep, and we will have rain, and we will begin again." And so there's the grief. And Joanna Macy, our great beloved elder, teaches grief and despair and empowerment. Yes, we feel our fear, and we need to, and honor our grief for the loss of species, or for the migrants drowning in the Mediterranean, or dying and crossing the desert, or the children who are kept in the detention centers on the border and separated from their parents, or the whatever it is, the iconic species of the polar bears, or the uniconic species that are dying out. And there's tragedy. There's a tremendous tragedy. And the heart has to be really big enough to hold it all. And this is really what our practice enables us to do, to have the capacity to tolerate this world with love and with compassion. Say, I love it all, as our dear friend Ram Dass says over and over again. I love all of it. And there on his big altar with the Buddha and Mother Mary and Jesus and, you know, all the great saints and Ganesh and Shiva and the Christian and Jewish mystics and all of that. And there's a, you know, a picture, had been before, it was, he had, let's see, Donald Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney, and then he's put, you know, Donald Trump right there with all the saints. And he said, yeah, this is my practice. That we need this in some way. And we need to find a capacity to stay in our own center in spite of, you know, the alarm that's out there. Now, one other thing that's really helpful in this, this is a sense of where trust comes, that it is not given to us to determine the outcome. Maybe humans will pass as a species and the roaches and rats will take over because we just blew it. And you think, oh, my children, my grandchildren, my people, my culture, all of that, you know. I hope not. And I don't think, maybe it'll happen through artificial intelligence. You know, we worry about climate and the machines are going to take over. This is not, I'm just not speaking like, oh, crazy science fiction. Half of the really, really most intelligent technologists, you know, like Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk, and they're more concerned about artificial intelligence than anything else. And we're about to have drone warfare where autonomous weapons, we're awash in weapons in this world, are going to be fighting each other and making the decisions without anybody deciding it on algorithms. And then where will those turn? And well, so we want to stay up at night, James? I can give you a whole bunch of things to help you stay up at night. We're in a wild change time. And I remember being at Ajahn Chah's monastery where you could see the planes flying over to do bombing sorties in Cambodia and Vietnam all the time from the air base. We weren't far from the border, you know. And he said, wars come and go. We are the place of peace in the center of it. And from this, then we can act with a big perspective. And there's a kind of trust in that. You get to plant seeds, but you do not get to determine the outcome. And as Thomas Merton said to this great activist who was complaining, you know, worried, he said, you may have to see that all your work, you know, it may turn out well, but it may just as well bring about its opposite, you know, and you can't determine that as an activist. All that you can do is listen and make sure that the seeds you plant are connected, focused with the values, the truth, and the rightness of what your heart knows that the world needs. And here's Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, your consciousness, our consciousness, is like the earth itself, planted with many kinds of seeds. But in consciousness, there are seeds of joy, of peace, of mindfulness, understanding, and seeds of love. And there are seeds of craving and anger and fear and hate and forgetfulness. And these healthy and unhealthy seeds are always there, sleeping in the bed, the soil of our own consciousness. The quality of our life and the life around us depends on the seeds we water. If we water a seed of peace in our hearts and minds, peace will grow. When the seeds of happiness are watered, they'll grow. When the seed of anger is watered, it will grow. And we become angry, and the world becomes angry. The seeds that are watered frequently are those that will flower. And that's what's given to us.
So let me ask you, I don't want to stay up at night and try not to, and I have my own ways of shifting my reality. But as one of the most beloved and respected meditation teachers and guides, anything that you could offer people to practice moving to the seeds of consciousness rather than the other ones. If say somebody gets activated and, like I'm saying, they know better, but they're lost. And if you feel like doing a little guided right now, you can quell my heart and everybody who's listening.
You know, maybe. I'm just going to go back to something from my childhood, or at least back when I was a teenager as an activist,
Okay.
carrying signs that said, "Make love, not war." Make love. Cook beautiful food, plant a garden, go out and walk in the trees, breathe, get a bigger perspective, hang out with people whose values are one of caring for the earth from a peaceful heart. Listen to the music that, you know, winds you down instead of, you know, riles you up. Make art, you know, write a poem, write a grief poem, write a fear poem, write an angry poem, you know, and then put it on the line to dry for a while and see, you know, let the feelings be present, but then turn them into a dance, turn them into something else. Yeah, I mean, I think just getting upset and angry is boring.
So when you do get upset and angry,
notice how boring. Notice how boring it is. I'm not saying judge it, because it's natural. We're worried, we're afraid. I get afraid too, but it's actually kind of boring, you know. And then when you see that it's boring, you go, oh yeah, it's boring. Let me see what else is there to do.
Except when you get activated and your hormones are rushing through your body, and your mind says, "Oh, I'm here again." How to get out from that activation?
First thing is you notice it and you say, "Okay, I'm really in it now," and you smile a little bit and say, "Okay, James is really caught again. Not a new story. James has been caught many times before, and some secret place of him likes this." Also, what's the little secondary gain in here? He feels important. He feels like he's going to make a difference. No one else is paying attention. James will stand up. Those people, they're going to, I have to protect. There's a heroic part. I mean, all these different, you listen to all those voices and you think what I shouldn't be. And then there's a judgmental part. You know, what would Ram Dass say if he were there with you? And you get it, and you just step back and you say, oh, this drama again, you know, and you might have three of them. You could even number them. All right, there's the environmental one, and there's the refugee one, and there's the Washington, D.C. political one. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Oh, this is number 2 again. All right, what's the plot? Yeah, here we are. Thank you. Bow to it. Place it on the altar, or say, okay, Kuan Yin, Bodhisattva compassion, you hold this for a while. I'm actually going to have a life, and I'm going to do the right stuff. But, you know, I don't have to live in this place. And you close your eyes, you feel what that landscape is like. You're living in it, and you say, you know, I think I'm going to pay my respects. I'll place this entire movie set, which it is, in the hands of Kuan Yin. And then I think I'm going to walk to another part of the lot where they're making a movie where something, not a triumphant movie, but where something beautiful is done between individuals, between communities, between humans and the earth in which we live, and change the channel. You know, read beautiful things, talk to other people that are saner than you at that time. That helps, you know. As I said, listen to music, watch comedy. I mean, you know, you have to admit, I mean, like our political thing now, if it weren't that it had the potential and already has caused tremendous suffering to many, many human beings, it's insanely comic. I mean, it's great. You couldn't have come up with a more comedic, no one would have bought the thing. But here's the Buddha. He says, live in joy and love, even among those who hate. Enjoy it, life. Live in joy and health, even among the afflicted. Live in joy and peace, even among the troubled. Quiet the mind, tend the heart, free from fear and attachment. Know the sweet joy of living in the way. And so I want to talk about this a little bit. You know, when the first of Donald Trump's laws or executive orders barring immigrants from the 7 predominant Muslim cultures came. And all these people were stuck in the airports, and it was only changing the vision of the USA from a place of refuge and a lamp, a beacon of freedom and caring, to one of, barring people and prejudice against Muslims and so forth. So I went down to the San Francisco International Airport for the demonstrations with my daughter, who is a young asylum lawyer her organization, Oasis Legal Services, gets asylum for people, primarily LGBT, this organization, whose lives are in danger from around the world. A gay guy from Uganda who'd be stoned to death if he was sent back, or, a lesbian woman from Guatemala where the gangs found out she didn't like boys and raped her, and, all these things. So Caroline, my daughter, went down with a whole bunch of young lawyers to help. There were more lawyers there than there were people, behind that immigration was holding. So then they put up signs, anyone need immigration help. It was beautiful. So there's all these demonstrations of the usual things, with their signs and people shouting and the chanting, no ban, no fear, refugees are welcome here, and so forth. So then we went to one gate, 400 people were there chanting, and it was an exit gate right by immigration. And in the middle was a New Orleans jazz band. And so as everybody's chanting, no ban, no fear, the drummer kicks in and kind of gives them a little background rhythm. Then the sax player plays this great riff as it goes on, and the trumpet comes in and on top of it and plays. And pretty soon we're all chanting, but it's this beautiful New Orleans jazz chant, no ban, no fear, and everybody's dancing to it, and the cops are dancing. I mean, it was really fabulous. And it took what was a antagonistic energy for some people and made it into art. And everybody could feel the love. They knew we were there. They knew we cared. If anything, it was more visible. But it wasn't this old, demonstrations have their place, but they're kind of an old form. I'm all for looking for new forms. Because you see a demonstration on TV, okay, there's another day. The big ones like March, Black Lives Matter, or, March for Our Lives are powerful. But the truth is that in last January, a year ago, there were hands around Lake Merritt in Oakland, 5,000 or 10,000 people. I'd like to do hands around the White House, 100,000, 200,000 people, clergy and children, hands around Congress. It's a very different archetype and image that we're together in this. So what was there in the airport, what was so true, we tend to be focused on the suffering, and we tend to be loyal to the suffering. Like, okay, that's where my life has meaning. This is Molly Ivins, who's a great activist and author and so forth. She says, so keep on fighting for freedom and justice, beloveds, but don't forget to have fun doing it. Be outrageous, rejoice in all the oddities that freedom can provide and produce. And when you get through celebrating the sheer joy of a good fight, be sure to tell those who come after how much fun it was. And so, yes, a person can make a difference and needs to. And our job is to quiet ourselves and then to reach out and mend the part of the world that we can mend, to lend our voice to the place that we can, to touch it, and have a good time instead of, oh my God, I can't sleep at night. And I mean, there are times when that's true. I'm not trying to take that away. When people, when we get so touched by what's happening and the pain of it to animals, to the earth, to children, to human beings. And we want to stand up, and it's really good. But we have a bigger task. We actually have to give birth to a humane and vast consciousness. And that the outer technology of the world has become so extraordinary that we have the great Library of Alexandria in our pocket, along with, every bad cat video that was ever made. And we can talk to people, climbing in Peru from our restaurant on a boat in, the South Seas. It's just extraordinary in a generation or two. But the technology isn't going to stop continuing warfare and continuing racism, continuing environmental destruction. What is needed on this earth is not so much activism as it is a change of consciousness, because all this is born in the human heart. And you who are listening, and we can be part of, can awaken to this change of consciousness. And then we do the same thing. We go to the airport, or we go to, an environmental group and support and saving the oceans or whatever it is. But we do it because we love it, not because we're out of guilt or grief or anger. The only force that's going to really change the world is a change in consciousness. That's the reality.
So to somehow move from the anger and the fear and the outrage to connection and caring and love.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Sign up. I'm signing up on the team. As Julie...
And then when you get caught in your nightmares, call a friend. Go out and have a drink, have a good beer,
Yeah. No, I'm right with you as far as somehow accessing joy in the midst of it all. It's one of my favorite lines is of Julia Butterfly Hill says, you take this as a joyful responsibility, not a heavy burden, and you do it from aliveness and caring and connection, and it's much more magnetizing than
yes it is,
fear and despair.
And you know that when a caterpillar goes into a cocoon, wraps itself, and then prepares to transform into a butterfly, it doesn't grow wings. It dissolves into a liquid mass of cells, and then it rebirths itself. So completely takes itself apart. And there's a particular kind of cell in that gooey mass when it's dissolved, which scientists have called imaginal cells, because these are the cells that are floating in there that can picture themselves flying around the flowers. These are the imaginal cells, and they're the seeds that reconstruct and reconnect to make the butterfly come out of that protoplasmic mass. We can become imaginal cells in this world of what's possible. Thank you, Julia Butterfly. This is staying with the butterfly.
The butterfly, yes. And the imaginal, it requires of us also to mutually support our imagination into, I think anyway, the best possible butterfly.
That's it. That's right.
Well, thank you so much for...
You're welcome.
Your thoughts and time and caring and love.
Yeah, the same to you, James. Lots of love to you. And to all you people who are listening, so much love, hugs and kisses and support. And as Gary Snyder said, don't feel guilty. If you're going to save it because you love it. Save it, have the joy of it, as Molly Ivan says, have a good time. I mean, there's the antithesis to the madness of our time. So, all right, take care. Okay.